The forest was quiet, but to Lyra it roared with danger. Every crack of a twig sounded like the footstep of a predator. Every shadow between the towering trees seemed ready to swallow her. She clutched her small satchel tightly against her chest, her thin arms trembling. Her ship, what was left of it, still smoldered somewhere behind her. The crash had scattered the few survivors of her people, and in the chaos, she had been left alone. Lyra was no warrior. She was barely into her teenage years by the measure of her kind, small even for her people's stature. Her long, delicate ears twitched at every noise, and her luminous eyes darted around constantly. She had been raised on stories whispered by elders, stories meant to keep children safe, but those stories were sharp with terror. Beware the humans, towering monsters who feed on the weak. They take, they devour, and they never give back. And now she was stranded on their world. Her heart hammered with every step as she stumbled through the undergrowth, her bare feet scratched and muddy. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but the fear of what might be lurking ahead kept her moving. She remembered the last glimpse of her parents during the evacuation, the chaos of alarms, the flames in the corridors, then the impact, darkness, fire, and silence. When she woke, there was only forest and smoke, no guiding hand, no familiar voice. Loneliness pressed down on her like a physical weight. She had been told her people might not survive if separated, that they needed one another for warmth and strength. But here she was, utterly alone in an alien wilderness. She dared not call out. To her, a human might be just beyond the next rise, listening, hunting. She imagined them, towering, broad-shouldered, with jaws that could split bone. Her tiny frame shuddered at the thought. What chance did she have if one of them found her? The evening sun bled red through the canopy, staining the leaves like wounds. She crawled beneath a hollow in the roots of a massive tree and pulled her satchel close. Inside was a broken data crystal, a strip of dried nutrient bark, and a small charm her mother had pressed into her hand before the evacuation. She clutched it now, smooth, oval, etched with the flowing script of her people, and whispered a prayer. Keep me hidden, keep me safe, do not let the monsters find me. Her stomach twisted painfully, but she dared not eat the last of her bark ration. If humans were truly the devourers of the stories, then she would need every scrap of strength to run, to hide, to survive. A sudden sound broke the stillness, the groan of metal. Lyra froze. Her sharp eyes caught the faint glow of firelight flickering in the distance, too steady to be natural. Her breath caught. Humans. The myths came rushing back. The feasts of blood, the cages where captives were kept until they were ripe for slaughter. She pressed herself deeper into the roots, her small body trembling. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision. She didn't want to die. Not here, not so far from the songs and laughter of her people. Yet a different thought whispered to her. What if the stories were wrong? She crushed it immediately. The elders could not be wrong. They had spoken with certainty, with the weight of generations. Humans were to be feared, always. The night grew colder. She hugged her knees and tried to stay awake, but exhaustion was stronger than fear. Her eyes drifted shut, though every instinct screamed at her to remain alert. Somewhere, in the distance, the firelight flickered again. A presence moved closer. And in that fragile moment, as Lyra slipped into restless sleep beneath the roots of the ancient tree, the fate of her fear and the truth about the so-called monsters drew nearer than she could ever have imagined.
Lyra woke to the crack of a branch snapping under weight. Her heart leapt into her throat.
She held her breath, body pressed against the roots, her wide eyes scanning the shadows. The forest was dim, painted with silver moonlight. Something moved between the trees, something big. Then she heard it, the low, rhythmic sound of footsteps, heavy, too heavy for any creature she knew. A human. She curled tighter into her hiding place, praying the earth itself would swallow her. But the figure drew closer, a faint glow in his hand, something humming softly, like a captured star. The light revealed a tall form, broad-shouldered, covered in strange fabric that gleamed faintly with damp. Lyra's pulse pounded in her ears. The monster has found me. The human crouched near the smoldering wreckage of metal not far from her hiding spot. He was examining it, her ship, the broken husk that had once carried her family. His expression was hard to read in the dim glow, but his movements were slow, deliberate. He wasn't tearing into the metal with claws. He wasn't roaring for prey. He was studying it. Lyra's fear cracked into confusion, but the old stories returned instantly. They lure you with calmness, and then they strike. When the man shifted his light, it fell across her hollow in the roots. She gasped before she could stop herself. The human froze. For a heartbeat, silence ruled. Then, slowly, so slowly, he turned the light toward her. Their eyes met. Her small, luminous ones glowing like frightened jewels, and his deep, human eyes widening in shock. Lyra let out a sharp cry and burst from her hiding place. She threw a handful of dirt and twigs at him, scrambling backward into the undergrowth. The man didn't roar or give chase. Instead, he raised one hand in the air, palm open, as if to show he carried no weapon. His voice came, deep and strange, but not harsh. "Wait! Hey, it's okay. I won't hurt you." She didn't understand the words, not all of them, but the tone carried something she had never expected from a monster. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't rage. It was gentle. Still trembling, Lyra grabbed a stone and hurled it at him. The rock struck his shoulder with a dull thunk. The human winced, but didn't retaliate. He simply lowered his arm and, astonishingly, pulled something from his pack. Food. It was a small packet, torn open with careful fingers. The smell drifted across the clearing. Savory, rich, unlike anything she had ever tasted. Her stomach twisted painfully at the scent. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. But her mind screamed, poison, a trick. Once you eat, they take you. The man must have seen her hesitation. Slowly, deliberately, he took a bite of the food himself. He chewed, swallowed, then held it out again, closer this time. His expression softened, the corners of his mouth lifting just slightly in what humans called a smile. Lyra froze. Her heart still hammered, yet her hunger clawed at her with equal force. She wanted to believe the gesture meant safety, but how could she trust the monster of every childhood nightmare? Her legs shook. She crept forward a single step, then stopped, trembling violently. She whispered in her own tongue, voice cracking, "Why don't you eat me?" Of course, he couldn't understand, but he lowered the food to the ground between them and stepped back, palms still open, eyes steady and calm. Lyra stared at the offering, torn between terror and desperation. At last, with a sob, she darted forward, snatched the packet, and scurried back like a cornered animal. She sniffed it, then forced herself to take the tiniest bite. Warmth filled her mouth. Salt, spice, nourishment unlike the brittle bark she had been surviving on. Against her will, tears stung her eyes. The human said something again, his voice quiet, almost soothing. She didn't know the words, but the sound eased some of the ice in her chest. For the first time, Lyra looked at him not as a monster, but as something else, something she could not yet name. And in the flicker of that fragile moment, the great myth of her people, that humans devoured all, began to fracture. The first bite was tiny, barely a nibble, yet it sent a shock of warmth through Lyra's starving body. She hadn't realized how weak she had grown until that moment, when her hands trembled not just from fear, but from the strain of hunger. She swallowed quickly, almost expecting poison to burn her throat. But nothing happened. Only a spreading comfort filling the hollow ache in her stomach. Her wide eyes lifted toward the human. He hadn't moved closer. He simply crouched where he was, elbows resting loosely on his knees, palms still open, watching her with an expression that seemed patient. Lyra's ears twitched. Why doesn't he take it back? Why doesn't he strike now? To test him, she lifted the food again and sniffed, then ate a larger bite. Her heart raced, but again, nothing, no trick, no trap, just sustenance. The man gave a small nod, as though encouraging her. He reached into his pack once more, pulled out a water flask, and tilted it back to drink. Then, carefully, he placed it on the ground and slid it across the dirt toward her. Lyra recoiled, pressing herself against the roots. Her people had been told humans used water to lure, that they tainted it with drugs to weaken prey. But then she remembered how he had eaten the food first. Slowly, she leaned forward, sniffed the flask, and risked a sip. Cool, clean water touched her tongue. Her throat ached with gratitude as she drank. She hadn't known she could cry from simple relief. The human spoke again, his voice low and steady. The words were meaningless to her, but the tone was clear. Reassurance. Lyra's ears widened. Why doesn't he take it back? Why doesn't he strike now? Why are you kind? You're supposed to be monsters. The man tilted his head, as though sensing her confusion even without understanding the words. For the first time she studied him properly. His features were strange. The flat nose, the rough jaw, the lines of his face so much sharper than her people's smooth ones. His body seemed impossibly large, a tower of strength. And yet, his eyes weren't cruel. They held no hunger, no threat, only a quiet warmth, like the fire he carried in his hand. Her fear was still a wall, but cracks had begun to show. The man reached into his pack once more, pulled out a thin cloth, and pointed at her leg. Only then did Lyra glance down and realize her calf was still bleeding from the crash. The gash was shallow, but angry, the dried blood sticking her skin together painfully. When the man moved toward her, she flinched and raised his stone again, ready to strike. He froze instantly, hands up, waiting. Slowly, he touched the cloth to his own arm, then back to hers, pointing. A simple gesture, but clear. He wanted to help. Her pulse thudded. Every instinct screamed to run. And yet, she stayed. She let him approach, trembling as he knelt beside her. His hands were enormous compared to her slender frame, yet when he pressed the cloth gently against her wound, his touch was careful, tender. Lyra gasped, expecting pain, but instead the pressure stopped the bleeding. He tied the cloth into a makeshift bandage with deliberate slowness, as if giving her time to pull away. When he leaned back, she found herself staring at him with wide, unblinking eyes. The fear was still there, but now it mixed with something unfamiliar, something dangerous. Curiosity. The man gave a small smile again, then gestured toward his camp in the distance, just a patch of canvas and firelight among the trees. He didn't pull her, he didn't command, he simply offered. Her throat tightened. To follow him could mean safety or doom. But the memory of the warmth in her stomach,
The clean water in her throat and the gentle bandage on her leg whispered louder than the old stories. She clutched her mother's charm in her hand, whispered a trembling prayer, and rose to her feet. With hesitant steps, she followed the human into the glow of his campfire. And so, for the first time, Lyra chose trust over fear.
The fire crackled softly, its glow painting the clearing in shades of gold and shadow. Lyra sat near the edge of the camp, her small form curled tightly, eyes flicking between the dancing flames and the giant human sitting across from her. He was quiet now, busying himself with a small metal device that hummed faintly as he tinkered. Sparks leapt when he twisted something inside, and Lyra flinched, clutching her charm. The human noticed and paused, his expression softening. He murmured something, gentle, reassuring words she could not understand, before setting the tool aside. Then he did something unexpected. He lifted a stick from the fire, careful not to burn himself, and dragged it across the dirt, drawing simple shapes. Lyra tilted her head, curiosity overcoming fear for a moment. The human sketched a round circle, then pointed upward. She followed his gaze and realized he meant the moon. Another shape, long, like a vessel. Then he pointed to her, then toward the smoldering wreck in the distance. He was asking about her ship. Lyra swallowed hard. Her voice trembled when she spoke, though she knew he wouldn't understand her tongue. "It was home, my family. We were fleeing." She clutched her knees, eyes glistening. "And now, I am alone." The human's expression softened. He didn't grasp the words, but something in her tone, in her eyes, reached him. Slowly, he drew another shape, a tall figure with a round head, a human. Then beside it, he drew a tiny stick figure with long ears. Her. He touched his chest, then tapped the larger figure in the dirt. Finally, he pointed to her, then the smaller drawing. Lyra blinked. He was saying, "You and I." Her heart clenched. Still, the stories of her elders weighed heavy. She shook her head fiercely and whispered, "No, you are monsters. You devour." Her voice cracked on the last word, tears brimming. The human frowned, puzzled. Then he did something that made her breath catch. He reached into his pack and pulled out the same packet of food he had shared earlier. Tearing off a piece, he set it on the ground and nudged it toward her. But this time, he didn't eat first. Instead, he placed the rest of the ration on his side of the fire, then slid it across the dirt. A clear message, yours as much as mine. Lyra's throat tightened. Slowly, she reached forward and took it. Her people's myths had painted humans as devourers, hoarders, beings who consumed without giving. Yet here was one offering her food without demand, without condition. Her voice trembled as she whispered in her language, "Why would you share? Why would a monster give?" Of course, he didn't know her words, but he must have sensed the question in her eyes. He gave a small shrug and pressed his hand to his chest, then gestured outward toward the forest, as if to say, "Because it is right." Lyra lowered her gaze. A silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of fire. She thought of the stories her mother had told of humans who hunted the small, who tricked the weak into cages. She had believed them without question, but the man across from her was unraveling those tales thread by thread, simply by existing. Her chest ached with confusion. Fear still clung to her, but alongside it rose something new, something dangerous, a fragile warmth, like a tiny flame sparking in the cold. She looked up at him again. Their eyes met across the firelight. His gaze wasn't predatory. It was steady, calm,
and strangely kind. Lyra quickly looked away, cheeks warming, though she didn't know why. That night, as she lay near the fire, wrapped in a blanket the human had wordlessly offered, she whispered to herself, Maybe the stories were wrong." Her heart beat faster at the thought, and in the dark, though she tried to fight it, she felt the first thread of trust tugging her toward the giant was not the monster she had always feared.
The sky darkened too quickly. Lyra noticed it first, the strange stillness in the forest, as though every creature had vanished. The leaves overhead shivered, though no breeze touched them. She lifted her head, ears twitching, and felt the weight of the air pressing down on her chest. Something was coming. The human, Ethan, though she did not yet know his name, looked up from his tools. His eyes narrowed at the horizon, where black clouds gathered like bruises. The wind began to pick up, sharp and restless. He muttered something under his breath, voice low and urgent, then started moving fast around the camp. Lyra's stomach tightened. She knew storms. Her homeworld had them often. But this sky felt angrier, wilder. The trees groaned as the wind surged, and the air smelled sharp, metallic. The human pointed toward the canvas shelter and motioned for her to go inside. Lyra froze, her fear rising again. Inside? With him? Every story of humans locking prey in cages screamed through her mind. "No," she whispered in her tongue, shaking her head, backing away. But then the storm broke. A howl of wind tore through the clearing, snapping branches, scattering sparks from the fire. The canvas strained against its poles. The first drops of rain were not gentle. They slapped the ground like thrown stones. Thunder cracked overhead, making the very earth tremble. Lyra yelped, pressing her hands over her ears. Lightning split the sky, a jagged white claw tearing across the darkness. The human rushed to her side, crouching low so his massive frame shielded her from the wind. He shouted something, words she didn't understand, but his tone was fierce with urgency. One strong hand gestured again toward the shelter. Another boom of thunder made Lyra flinch. This storm was no myth, it was real, and it could kill. Her instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. She clutched her charm, trembling, then forced herself to nod. The human scooped up the fire kit and led the way, his shoulders bent against the gale. Lyra stumbled after him, nearly swept off her feet by the force of the wind. She slipped on the mud, but his hand caught hers, huge, warm, steady, and pulled her back up. Her heart thudded wildly, not from fear of him this time, but from the way his grip anchored her in the chaos. Inside the shelter, the storm roared around them. The canvas walls shuddered, the poles creaked, and rain pounded like hammers. Lyra curled into a corner, arms around her knees, shivering. She could feel the structure tremble, as if it might be torn away at any moment. The human moved quickly, reinforcing the supports, his face set with determination. At one point, a pole slipped loose and he lunged to catch it, his body bracing against the wind that ripped through the seams. Lyra gasped, convinced the storm would take him, but he fought it back, securing the shelter again with raw strength and stubborn resolve. When at last he slumped against the wall, soaked and panting, Lyra found herself staring at him. He had risked himself, not for his tools, not for his camp, but for her. The fear inside her shifted, changing shape. It was no longer the terror of prey before a predator. It was something more complicated, tangled with wonder. Lightning flashed, illuminating his weary face. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Lyra felt warmth spread through her chest despite the cold storm. She looked away quickly, cheeks burning, but the feeling lingered. The storm raged on through the night. Lyra dozed fitfully, waking often to the crash of thunder, each time finding him still there, watchful, steady, protective. And when dawn finally broke, the forest steaming and broken, but alive, Lyra realized something she had never dared to think before. She felt safer beside the human than she did alone.
The storm had passed, leaving the forest dripping and heavy with silence. Water pooled in the roots of trees, steam rising in ghostly tendrils as the sun returned. Lyra stepped carefully from the shelter, her bare feet sinking into damp soil. The air was fresh, cleansed, almost gentle. But when she glanced back into the tent, her relief faltered. The human, her human, did not rise. He sat slumped against the canvas wall, his eyes closed, his chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. His skin looked paler than before, damp with sweat. The strength that had braced the shelter through the storm seemed to have drained from him overnight. Lyra froze. Panic clawed at her chest. For a heartbeat, old fears surged back. This is a trick. He only pretends weakness to lure you closer. But the illusion shattered as she drew nearer. He wasn't pretending. He was ill. "Human!" she whispered, though she couldn't understand her tongue. Her small hand hovered above his shoulder, trembling. His breath rasped faintly, his lips dry. A memory stabbed through her heart. The last time she had seen her father after a storm on their homeworld. Fever had taken him, and nothing they did had saved him. No, Lyra shook her head fiercely. Not again. She scrambled around the camp, searching desperately. His pack, his tools, anything. She found more rations, another flask of water. She hurried back to him, kneeling at his side. "Drink!" she begged softly, tilting the flask toward his lips. At first, he didn't respond. Desperation pushed her to press the cool metal gently against his mouth. At last, he swallowed a little, coughing weakly, but keeping it down. Relief flooded her. Lyra broke the ration into small pieces, nibbling first to prove it was safe, then offering it to him. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, before sliding shut again. But he chewed. He ate. Her throat tightened. She had feared him since the moment they met, but now she feared losing him. The day stretched long and slow. Lyra tended him as best she could, fetching water from a nearby stream, using her small hands to press cool cloths against his forehead. Each time he stirred, she whispered words in her language, soft lullabies her mother used to sing. Words he couldn't possibly understand, but words filled with care. "You are not allowed to leave me," she murmured, her voice breaking. "Not after showing me I was wrong." She didn't know when it happened, but somewhere between feeding him and guarding his rest, she realized she was no longer afraid of his size, his strength, or his alien face. Instead, she saw his fragility, his humanity, and it awakened something in her. As dusk fell, she sat close beside him, watching the firelight dance across his features. He looked younger in sleep, vulnerable in a way that shattered every myth she had carried. The devourer of legends was just a man who had risked his life to save hers, who now needed her to survive. Her chest ached with a strange new feeling, not fear, not even gratitude, something deeper, more dangerous, more tender. Carefully, she reached out and touched his hand. It was so large compared to hers, rough from work, warm even in illness. She held it lightly, whispering into the night, "Maybe you are not the monster. Maybe you are my light." Her words vanished into the hush of the forest, but her heart heard them. And for the first time, Lyra no longer saw herself as prey before a predator. She saw herself as a soul tied to another, small and fragile, yet stronger because of him. The awakening had begun.
The days that followed blurred together. Ethan, though Lyra still did not know his name, slowly regained his strength. With her tear, his fever broke and color returned to his face. When he finally sat upright again, meeting her gaze with tired but steady eyes, Lyra felt a surge of pride. She had kept him alive. She had saved her monster. But just as that fragile bond began to blossom into something she could no longer deny, everything changed. It happened at dusk. A faint hum shivered through the trees, too smooth and rhythmic to be natural. Lyra's ears perked instantly. She knew that sound. It was the pulse of an engine, familiar and foreign all at once. Her people. She scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. Between the trees, lights flickered, and then figures emerged, tall, slender, their silver eyes glowing faintly in the twilight. They were like her, skin pale, ears long, movements graceful. Survivors of the crash. "Lyra!" one of them cried in her language. A woman rushed forward, arms outstretched. "Child, you're alive!" Lyra's throat constricted. She wanted to run into the woman's arms, to collapse against the comfort of her own kind. But she hesitated, because behind her, Ethan had risen too, standing a cautious distance away. His body was tense, protective, his eyes wary. The survivors froze when they saw him. Gasps, hisses, words sharp with fear and disgust. "A human," one spat. "The devourer." "Get away from him, Lyra. He'll kill you. He'll eat you." Lyra flinched, torn in two. Those were the words she had once believed, the stories etched into her very bones. And yet, she glanced at Ethan, at the man who had bandaged her wounds, shared his food, braved a storm to shield her, the man whose hand she had held while he burned with fever. He was no devourer. Still, the weight of her people's eyes pressed on her. They were her family, her blood. If she defied them, she would be alone again. The woman reached for her. "Come, child, leave the monster." Lyra's hands trembled. She could hear her heart pounding, feel the divide tearing her apart. To choose her people meant safety, belonging. To choose the human meant isolation, but also truth. Ethan didn't move. He didn't raise a weapon or make a sound. He simply met her eyes, steady and calm, as if saying, "The choice is yours." Lyra swallowed hard. Memories flashed in her mind, her hunger eased by his gift, her wound wrapped in his cloth, his hand catching hers in the storm, his life in her care as fever threatened him. She had thought him a monster, but he had shown her what it meant to be human. Her voice shook, but it did not break. "You're wrong," she whispered to her people. "He is no devourer. He saved me. He is—" She faltered, her cheeks burning, heart racing. "He is good." The crowd recoiled as if struck. Murmurs rippled like a storm through their ranks. The woman's face hardened. "You have been deceived. He has poisoned your mind."
"No," Lyra said, firmer now, her hands clenched at her sides. "It has opened it." Silence fell. Her people stared at her, stunned, unwilling to believe. But Lyra's chest felt lighter than it ever had. For the first time, she was not speaking out of fear, she was speaking out of love. Ethan remained silent, but his eyes softened, filled with something unspoken that made Lyra's heart ache. In that moment, she knew the truth of her choice. No matter what her people thought, she could not abandon him. Not now, not ever. And so, trembling but resolute, Lyra stepped back toward the human.
The clearing was silent after Lyra's step back toward Ethan. The survivors of her people stared in disbelief, their silver eyes filled with shock and sorrow. To them, it must have looked like betrayal. To Lyra, it felt like truth. Ethan stood behind her, tall and unmoving, not raising a hand against them, not even speaking. He didn't need to. His stillness spoke louder than threats ever could. He was not their enemy. But the others didn't see it. "Lyra," the woman pleaded again, voice breaking, "he has ensnared you. Humans take, they consume, they destroy. How can you stand at the side of a devourer?" Lyra's throat tightened, but she lifted her chin. Her voice trembled, yet each word carried the weight of her heart. "Because he gave when he had no reason to. Because he protected me when I was nothing to him. Because," she faltered, breath shaking, "because he showed me what love is." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Love? Between prey and predator? Impossible. One of the men sneered. "He deceives you. Look at him. Look at his size, his strength. It is in his nature to dominate." Lyra spun on him, fire sparking in her chest. "Then why did he never harm me? Why, when I struck him with stones, did he not strike back? Why did he share his food? Why did he nearly die saving me in the storm?" Her people faltered. Doubt flickered in their eyes. Ethan, still silent, bent suddenly to his pack. He pulled out a broken metal rod, the remains of their ship's power conduit. With a few tools, he set to work, sparks flying as he repaired what they could not. His hands moved with practiced skill, his face focused but calm. The aliens watched in stunned silence as he pieced the conduit back together and handed it to them. No demand, no price, just an offering. Lyra's voice softened, carrying into the hush. "You call him a devourer, but devourers take and leave nothing. This human gives, he heals, he saves, he asks for nothing in return." The survivors exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, the myth wavered. The woman, the same who had first called out to Lyra, stepped forward, staring at Ethan. Her voice was cautious. "Why would a human help us?" Ethan didn't understand the words, but Lyra did. She looked up at him, and when his eyes met hers, she felt her heart steady. Turning back, she answered for him. "Because he sees us not as prey, but as people." Silence stretched long and heavy. Then, slowly, the woman bowed her head. Perhaps it wasn't full acceptance. Perhaps the fear of humans would linger for generations. But in that moment, a door cracked open. A seed of doubt planted in the soil of old lies. Lyra stepped closer to Ethan, her small hand finding his. His fingers curled gently around hers, cautious yet certain. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through her, of safety, of belonging, of love. She raised her voice once more for her people and for herself. I thought humans were monsters, but the truth is this: they are not devourers, they are protectors. And in their hearts burns a light we never understood, a light I will not abandon. Her people lowered their gazes, torn between disbelief and reluctant wonder. But Lyra no longer needed their approval. She had chosen. Ethan gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, his eyes soft as dawn. He didn't know her words, but he understood her heart, and that was enough. As the sun broke fully through the clouds, gilding the forest in light, Lyra whispered just for him, "You did not devour me. You saved me, and you taught me how to love." The myths of monsters shattered that day, replaced by something far stronger: hope.